It's a rainy Sunday here, and I thought what a perfect time to get into my 10 tips for choosing your first portrait camera setup. Let's get into it. Now, the first and most important thing with any photo is making sure you get the shot in focus. Different cameras all have different autofocus modes with different pros and cons. What you want to look for is a camera with fast autofocus, such as Canon's Dual Pixel AF. This will ensure that you can capture moving subjects in focus, and if you have the budget for it, getting something modern with either face or, better yet, eye tracking for perfect portraits every time. Now, next up may be a surprise to some of you, but for portraits, I find a camera strap to be far more useful than a tripod. Often for portraits, I find myself on location with clients, moving around and trying to capture a little bit of motion in the shot, which just doesn't work so well with a tripod. Having your camera on a strap really lets you explore your creativity more easily, and can be a huge help if you have a bit of a walk to a scenic location for the shoot. When looking at different cameras, it can be hard not to play the megapixel game, but believe me, I've taken hundreds of portraits with just a 12 megapixel camera, and every single one is sharp, and the clients love them. Now, you may hear about some newer phones having 100 megapixel cameras, but believe me, the size and quality of pixels is far more important than the amount of megapixels. I would suggest getting somewhere in the 20 to 30 megapixel range, just to give you a little bit of scope for cropping in the edit. Now, speaking of the edit, I suggest you look for a camera that lets you shoot in a RAW format. This is very common in the market now, but if you are looking for something older and more affordable, this is a question worth asking before you buy. RAW photos do give you significantly more ability to edit colors and lighting in the edit, rather than a compressed image like a JPEG does. And for a beginner, that means the potential to save an image or perhaps even an entire shoot that you might have exposed incorrectly. Number 5, something else to take note of is the battery of a camera. The last thing you want to do is get to a fantastic location and start shooting, and then your battery dies. Most cameras have a rating of how many images you should be able to expect from a full battery, but I suggest you have at least 2 batteries for every shoot, just to be on the safe side. And if you want to be extra safe, consider getting a camera that can be charged or powered from a USB battery bank. One thing to consider if you are wanting to shoot weddings or anything with critical photos is that some cameras now have 2 SD card slots. While I have never ever had a card fail that wasn't recoverable with some software at home, all of my professional cameras do have 2 SD card slots, just so that in the event of a corrupt card, the second card will have a copy of every image and video file that was on the first one. Many newer cameras have a built-in feature called IBIS. This is essentially a gimbal for your camera's sensor and helps to move the sensor around to prevent shaking and blurry images. If you're shooting with lower shutter speeds for darker environments or at longer focal lengths, this is definitely something you should consider. Now, if you've already bought a camera and it doesn't have IBIS, what do? Don't stress too much, because lenses can also have built-in stabilization, and this helps out with camera movement also. Every manufacturer calls it something a little different, so it's worth having a look at the spec sheet, or just asking before you buy. Now, keep in mind that lenses with stabilization do use considerably more power than a lens that isn't stabilized, so perhaps another good reason to buy a spare battery. When looking for a lens, you'll start to see all these different numbers and symbols, and at the start, this can be pretty daunting. The focal length is usually represented in a way such as a single number like 35mm for a fixed focal length lens, whereas a zoom lens will have something like 24 to 70mm or 18 to 55mm. These numbers are representative of how wide or how zoomed in a lens can get. Now, the aperture of a lens refers to how much light a lens can let in and how blurry your background will be behind your focus point. This will be shown with an F, such as f1.8, f2.8, f4, and so on. Some more budget lenses will also have an aperture that changes as you zoom in. These will often appear like f3.5 to f6.3. Some more budget lenses will also have an aperture that changes as you zoom in, and these will often appear like f3.5 to f6.3. Now our 10th and final tip is for what focal length and aperture you should buy. I suggest picking your focal length first and then getting the lowest aperture lens you can afford, such as f1.8 or f2.8. And these will let more light in and give you more flexibility with your background blur and shooting in darker environments. Now for the focal range, prime lenses with one fixed number will often give you sharper images, and zoom lenses will give you a lot more flexibility. But ultimately it comes down to your style. Personally, I love to shoot portraits with an 85mm prime lens, but I have colleagues that shoot with a 24 to 105, a 35, and even a 70 to 200mm. So the choice really is yours. One thing to keep in mind is that these millimeter values are not equal between all cameras, and I suggest you find out the crop value of your camera and if it has one. A camera with a 15 to 45mm lens and a 1.6 times crop factor, like the Canon M50 that I'm recording on now, will actually work more like a 24 to 70mm, while on an uncropped or full frame camera, the value on the lens is what you get. Well, I hope these tips have been a help to the 3 or 4 of you watching. Please let me know in the comments which tip you thought was the best and any questions you might have for me next time. See ya.